Really mai me ke aloha mai ke laulo kalai kumukahi a hiki ka mo lehula ano kalai lehua a panapai mokua kanaloa Papahānaumokuākea aloha mai ka kou. O wono o kalani kiocho no hilo mai au ma ka moku o umi. O wau no ka Native Hawaiian Program Coordinator for NOAA Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument. No leila, welcome to our forum. Papahānaumokuākea, large-scale progression of co-management and cultural integration. So during this session, we will look at a historical timeline of events, of very prominent events, from about 2000 to 2016, by which Native Hawaiians were at the forefront of effective advocacy that resulted in the protection and management of the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And you will hear why this was and continues to be an important aspect of Hawaiian worldview and definitely at the forefront for Hawaiians in reaching this advocacy. In a unique arrangement, laws establishing the Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument call for collaborative multi-agency governance and for integrated management that places cultural and natural resources on equal footing. This represents a significant step forward to bring indigenous institutions into contemporary management in the United States and in the realm of marine protected areas, and to operationalize concepts of integrated resource management. The governance arrangement for the monument offers a new model in the MPA management, with 7 state and federal agencies forming a co-managing partnership. A shared co-manager identity as Papahānaumokuākea is reinforced through an informal one monument policy of joint decision-making and collaborative efforts for agency co-branding. The name Papahānaumokuākea signifies the spiritual significance of the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands in the context of indigenous Hawaiian culture and worldview. Thus far, the impetus to integrate cultural and natural resource management has transformed monument operations and agency culture. How's the internet back there? Still down. So what I'd like to do is hand off the pulama, the torch, to my colleague from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. You have the Papahānaumokuākea Marine Manager for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Keola Lindsey.
Mahalo Kalani, and good morning to everybody. First of all, those of us on the panel want to extend a big mahalo to the organizers of the conference. It's very well put together. Heard a lot of positive comments this morning. What a wonderful event to bring everyone together to talk about caring for our island homes. We also want to recognize the lands that our building sits upon. We're in the vicinity of Kalia. We also want to thank the people of Oahu for being excellent hosts for those of us who are visiting. And the goal of our panel today is to take us on a little huaka'i, a little holo holo out to the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands and continue to share a place that has a power of its own, has a relevance to those of us here in the southeastern Hawaiian Islands, and we hope as managers and a community involved has relevance to the world as well. I have the privilege of being the moderator for this panel, and a panel made up of 4 individuals who I've had the honor of working with for many years now. But I'd also want to acknowledge that in addition to these 4 esteemed folks up here, there are many, many others that work very hard or have historically worked very hard to care for this place, continue to work very hard today to make Papahānaumokuākea what it is. I also want to send a shout out to my colleagues on the management board, the co-managing agencies. You have the Office of Hawaiian Affairs up here. You have the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries from NOAA here. But in our audience, I've seen some familiar faces also involved in management from the Fish and Wildlife Service, from National Wildlife Refuges and Ecological Services, from the Department of Land and Natural Resources, Forestry, Wildlife, and aquatic resources, and from another part of NOAA, the National Marine Fisheries Service, among others. Again, there's many, many faces out there, and many folks working hard every day to make this place what it is. Brief introduction for our panel up here. Again, they wear many hats, have a long career in supporting community, for working towards bettering our natural resource and cultural resources in Hawaii. First of all is William Aila Jr., to my immediate right. Currently is the Deputy Director for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Prior to that, Chairman of the Department of Land and Natural Resources. Prior to that, worked very hard caring for ocean resources all around Hawaii, but especially in a place that's near and dear to his heart, the Waianae Coast. So aloha, William. Athlene Clark is currently the Superintendent for NOAA Office of National Marine Sanctuaries in Papahānaumokuākea. Prior to that, she took a little break from the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands and hung out with the Army Corps for a while. But before her Army Corps chapter of life, was actually involved very heavily in the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands in her role with the Department of Land and Natural Resources. And as we'll get to a little bit later, had the opportunity to, along with all the other panelists, to actually head up and experience this place. Aloha, Athlene. Next, Dr. Kekuewa Kikiloi, currently an assistant professor at the Kamakakūokalani Center for Hawaiian Studies, but also in a previous chapter of his career, worked for NOAA during the formative years of standing up the monument and working to integrate many of the cultural issues into mainstream management. And of course, is one of several leading researchers on the islands of Nihoa and Mokumanamana, helping us remember some of the knowledge that's out there. Aloha, Kekuewa. And then our last panelist is someone I have the privilege of working with quite a bit at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Brad Wong. He is also a voyager with the Polynesian Voyaging Society, having been a part of the Malamo Honua Worldwide Voyage and several legs on that. Also a coach and paddler with Kailua Canoe Club, where we first met, and makes a habit of leaving me in the office and going on many trips up to the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. I don't know how he pulled that one off, but good job, Brad. Aloha. So as Kalani mentioned, we're going to start off with taking a look at just some of the historical timeline for the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And I think when we look at the actual development of more of the conservation management structure that we are familiar with today, that takes us back to around the year 2000 era. I'd also note that right before that, kind of a formative event happened with the effort by a community group led by Halealoha Ayao to return iwi kupuna to the area, that kind of began a process of reconnecting Hawaiian knowledge to the place. But soon thereafter, that would have been in 1997, but soon thereafter, the idea of more of a management structure focused on conservation began to take place. So what I wanted to do was ask William to begin with, to kind of take us back to that year 2000 era, and just kind of share with us some of the things going on, some of the thought processes going on, some of the challenges that were encountered as we were in the year 2000 looking at a coral reef ecosystem reserve. William, if you don't mind, if you can take us back to that time.
Sure, as long as I just had to find the on button for the mic. I needed the glasses. So you young guys, enjoy your eyesight when you're young. When you get older, you got to hold things farther away, and then eventually you give in and you need glasses. So it will happen. Before we talk about when we were much younger, some of us, I just want to acknowledge, you see us very nervous up here on the stage, and it's not because we're afraid to talk, because everybody over here talks a lot. It's because we want to do honor to, first of all, the place, and then second of all, to all the kupuna who have inspired us. And Kekuewa is going to bring forth some kupuna into the discussion. And it's important to remember the folks that went before us, that paved the ground for us. So in about 2000, the year 2000, it follows sort of, many of you are too young to remember, but it follows a rather contentious time in Hawaii offshore fishing, in which there was a great deal of, or a big influx of an industrial longline fleet. And so a lot of fishermen in Hawaii, the small boat fishermen, got involved in fisheries management at the federal level. And a lot of us joined panels of Westpac and began to understand this sort of federal fishery model that was going on offshore. It included bottom fish, it included pelagics, it included coral reef fisheries at the time, nearshore fisheries, the lobster fishery, which no longer exists. So it was sort of an awakening for fishermen and environmentalists in Hawaii about what was happening with federal fisheries. Isaac and Tammy Harp, Vicky Holt Takamini, Uncle Buzzy Agard, all participated. And what we observed at the time was there was no balance. There was no one speaking for protection. It was about speaking for exploitation. And so the idea of protection for the northwestern Hawaiian Islands began to be discussed. And the conversation went all over the place. It went from, should we create a marine monument? Should we do a national monument? Should we do a refuge? And ultimately, I will share with you the tough political truth. It came down to creating the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands Coral Reef Ecosystem Reserve. And that is because of sort of the power brokers at the time in Washington, D.C. A monument was something that the president could do. Congress was not ready at the time for a national marine sanctuary in this area. And so the discussions occurred, and I have to tell you that the folks that really, really pushed and deserve some credit aren't in the room today with us. Auntie Vicky Holt Takamini, Isaac and Tammy Harp, and Uncle Buzzy Agard went to Washington, D.C. and had meetings with President Clinton at the time, and eventually President Clinton signed a proclamation creating the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands Coral Reef Ecosystem. Along with that came the Reserve Advisory Council, and many folks, Linda Paul, trying to remember some of the other folks, Tim Johns, a lot of folks participated in that and sort of laid the foundation for what eventually became Papahānaumokuākea Marine Monument and then the expansion later on. So that sort of sets it up. There was a need. There was exploitation going on. There was consciousness. There was a realization that these resources are not only biological resources, they're biocultural resources, they're cultural resources, and really an awakening. And I do have to share, I think one of the developments that really, really sort of pushed through was some science that was being done on Nihoa and Mokumanamana by Kekuewa, and sort of dating, I don't know if he remembers, might be too early in his career, dating presence of Hawaiians on the not the carbon dating, but some similar coral dating, right? And the stories that Kekuewa shared with the folks in the room really started this cultural awareness and cultural awakening, which blossomed, I think, in the following years to Hawaiians eventually receiving the opportunity to be a co-trustee in the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, becoming a co-trustee. So with that, I will stop.
Mahalo, William. Athlene, you were also, I mean, we're going to get to your current role working with NOAA right now, but during those formative years between 2000 and 2006, you had a front row seat and was an active participant while you were with the Department of Land and Natural Resources with this effort. Again, just like William did, can you take us back in time and share some of what you were thinking? Like, wow, what were you guys taking on? Was it doable? Take us back in time, Athlene.
Aloha, everyone. Thank you for attending our session today. And as Keola said, yes, I've been at this with a little hiatus in between for now 20 years in terms of helping to create and protect this very, very special place called Papahānaumokuākea. And at that time, I was with Department of Land and Natural Resources in eventually what turned into be the first co-manager's position. But before that, it was a special assignment through the governor's office to help with negotiating on this. And really, there was parallel processes that actually started the conversation. And one was a renewal or a reawakening and reinternment and everything that happened, as William talked about, from the cultural perspective. The other was that there was an executive order that Clinton also created for the protection of coral reefs and the start of the Coral Reef Task Force, the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force. And the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force still exists today. And the Coral Reef Task Force was made up of 12 of the senior elected officials of all of the federal agencies, and then representatives from the governor of all the states and territories with coral reefs. And the very first meeting they had was in Florida, and everybody thought, oh, Florida get all the reefs? And then we started talking to them about all the reefs in the Pacific, and also the diversity and amount of speciation and just everything else having to do with the reefs. And we started showing them pictures, and we started giving them the pie charts, and we started talking about the territory, and especially talking about this place called the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands and all the coral that existed up there and how extensive and expansive this area was. And nobody knew about it. I mean, they didn't really know much about the Pacific, because to get from Washington, D.C. to Florida is a less than 3 hour flight. And so to know anything about the Pacific at all, and particularly to know anything about what the Hawaiian archipelago really was and the expanse of what was there, was really eye-opening for them. And it became, in many ways, another one of those, oh, wait a minute, there's this resource there. And not just there, but also started to bring into the picture the resources in the Pacific remote areas and in American Samoa and the Marianas and just all of the rest of that, and have these conversations about the fact that within the United States jurisdiction, the amount of coral reefs was actually impressive. It was expansive. It's one of the largest areas in the world when you add it all up. And so the Coral Reef Task Force initiated, through the high-level membership, conversations also about what do we want to do to protect these special places. And at that time, I was there representing the state with Tim Johns and several others, and started those conversations in the leadership roles at NOAA and Interior and with the Council on Environmental Quality and the White House on what would it take and how does it look for us to also create a protected area. And as William said, there was back and forth about, is it a monument? Is it a sanctuary? What do we want this to be? And in 2000, President Clinton decided that he wanted to actually hear from Hawaii. And so he instructed the Secretaries of Interior and Commerce to hold visioning sessions. And many of you may remember those. Those were some of the original input or conversations that happened all around the state, where people were asked, what do you want to see? What is it that you think is important about this place? And at that same time, people like Buzzy Agard and Tammy and Isaac and others had already been talking to different groups in the communities. And those two things coalesced together around the then what developed to be this executive order that created the Coral Reef Ecosystem Reserve and set aside special areas around each island and atoll, and called for initially what was to become the development of a national marine sanctuary, which then got usurped. But that's a later part of the story. So I just kind of wanted to also give you the perspective from sort of the government side at that point, but it was a two-part and very integrated process for us to be able to hear from the communities and involve everyone and engage everyone in that conversation. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Athlene. So during this time when there were calls for increased protection from a conventional perspective, whether it was the ecosystem reserve, possibility of a monument, folks were also getting the opportunity to engage with kupuna, who a generation before them had their generation before them were still actively voyaging to the area, maintaining connections to the area, but that younger generation themselves had the opportunity to basically work up there for different purposes. And Kekuewa, I know you had the opportunity to sit down and kind of talk story and gain knowledge from some of those kupuna who were, you know, the privilege of being a kupuna. You can talk in riddle, you can talk in code. You don't need to give all the answers up front. You give clues and hints, and then let that younger generation figure it out. So, can you share some of your experiences with those kupuna you had the chance to interact with, and just kind of share with us how that went?
Yeah. So I guess to take you back, this is about like 17 years ago, right? And so I was like in my late 20s, and so when you think about like the 90s going into the 2000s, I think there was like a fundamental shift that happened in the Hawaiian community where I would say that at least being a Hawaiian studies major in the 90s, there was a growing cohort of young Hawaiians that were going to come out and make a difference in the world. Yeah. But the difference was not like how it was before, where it was just straight activism. It was more of a shift away from being angry and just focusing on what are we going to do about these problems now? Because we already know about the historical injustices, the taking of our lands, all the problems that we experience in our homeland. But what are we going to do about it, right? And so in the 2000s, a lot of us were emerging as young professionals. And I would say I was just at the right place at the right time because, you know, having like research skills, I was able to really go into the archives, really go into to these islands and experience them for myself, and then also kind of tap into sort of the living community of kupuna that still existed, still lived at the time. I would say, you know, all of those kind of had to come together though, right? Because there was sort of this prevailing myth that Hawaiians didn't go up there. That was the dominant myth that was in all of the literature from anthropology, from history, you know, this idea that they're mystery islands and we don't know what happened to the people up there. They just died off or something, or they disappeared, and all we have are the ancient relics and the ruins that exist there. But the more we dived into the literature, the more we dived into the mo'olelo from Hawaiian language newspapers, the more we went up there and started to do science, we started to realize, well, there was actually continuity. Like, people didn't actually disappear. I think just the researchers didn't know what they were talking about, you know? And so talking to kupuna was one critical step, I would say, because there were still kupuna alive that remembered things and had connections up there. They might not have had connections to the super ancient past, but there was continuity definitely within the 1900s, you know, where we thought that Hawaiians stopped going there altogether, right? So some of the kupuna were definitely Uncle Buzzy Agard, for one. You know, he was probably the cornerstone of the movement, I would say, for this thing. From the beginning, from the very beginning, he was fighting for the establishment of the EOs for the Coral Reef Ecosystem Reserve. So some of the slides you see up there is sort of this timeline, but if you can imagine, it's kind of like layers of a cake. You're just baking a cake and making that thing thicker and thicker to the point where you can't penetrate it, right? And so that's what I kind of liken the protection for Northwest Hawaiian Islands. There's all these stages that needed to happen in order for us to get to where we are today, where it's got layers of protection, and it's very hard to penetrate those layers of protection. So we have something of a kind of like a waihona, yeah, something that will be protected for future generations up there. But with Uncle Buzzy Agard, he was a staunch advocate for the restriction of fishing, because he was a fisherman that spent a big chunk of his life up there being a commercial boat operator, like on French frigate shows, I believe. And he saw the decline of fish over time, and so he was more about protection in his older years, and felt like they had done like irreparable harm to the place, and wanted to sort of amend those things, right? So he was really involved in the creation of the rules, the fishing rules that limited commercial fishing up there. Some of the other people that were involved, Uncle Eddie Ka'anana, Uncle Walter Paulo from Milali'i. To me, those guys were incredible. Like, they were some of the mighty men of the sea. I don't know how else to put it. Like these kupuna that like grew up on the ocean, and they embodied like the values of pono and kuleana like to the farthest extent. And so, just being a younger Hawaiian and being around them, it was amazing to just see the type of dedication and determination that they embodied. I also saw a lot of that in William, who was the leader of the movement in the beginning, and then Halealoha Ayao for young men to see Hawaiian leaders like that, especially men, because oftentimes men are not in the forefront for Hawaiian leadership. It was important, and so I try to embody that today, where you have sort of a really staunch sort of approach, like, we will not stop until we complete the mission kind of attitude, right? These are what these guys taught us, like, do not quit until you get it done. Like, there's really no excuses, yeah. And so Uncle Eddie, Uncle Walter, instrumental in the beginning years, came to all the meetings. They had memories from the 50s and the 60s of being on the boats. They worked for U.S. Fish and Wildlife up there. And so they weren't like, in models on double hull canoes or anything like that, but for modern Hawaiians in the 1900s, they were doing their thing, and they had a connection to these places. Dr. Isabella Abbott was another one. She was heavily involved in the beginning. Super staunch lady. I mean, if any of you guys knew her, she was a tough lady, man. I mean, being like a sort of a coordinator role as a young Hawaiian back then, I would get scoldings a lot from her, and I'd just be like, kind of just suck it up. But to me, like the ultimate validation was like many years later when she was older. She goes, "Oh boy, you really came through. You sticked it out," because she thought I was going to give up. You know what I mean? She almost assumed I was going to give up. So I just kind of laughed. But that kind of praise from her was like the gold standard. Yeah, like you've accomplished something, because she doesn't just give that kind of stuff out. Yeah. There was other kupuna like Uncle Kimo Kapahulehua, who was the first canoe captain for the Hokulea. He had memories of his father's and his uncle's generation of them going up on canoes from the Ni'ihau. And so, that sort of continuity and memory was really important back then. Uncle Harry Fuller, also from Ni'ihau, who lived up on Alewa Heights, and I don't think anybody even knew he lived there, but some of us found out that this old Ni'ihau kupuna lived up there, and we started visiting him. And he had memories of people going to Ka'ula, on canoes. And so there was some continuity of memory still there as well. So that was essential to sort of validate, I would say, the cultural resurgence, I would say, that was happening during that time.
Mahalo, Kekuewa. Definitely brought some mana kupuna into the room with your memories of all those kupuna who did so much work in the area. I think we've done a good job of setting up the foundation, the historical view on what led up to Papahānaumokuākea as we know it today. I think in those early years, the intent was always a seamless transition of nature and culture. That actually became one of the dominant themes when the World Heritage Inscription moved forward, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later in the session. But this idea of nature and culture, the integration of all disciplines into work into the area, I really wanted to now turn to Brad, who's been able to go on some of the management trips up into the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. and talk about that idea of how do trips and how do management activities improve and get better when you have groups of people working together, open-minded, conventional research coming into the mix, traditional knowledge coming into the mix on the ground or on the sea and then on the ground on the islands. Brad, if you can just share a little bit about your experiences up there.
Yeah, I think one of the main things of Papahānaumokuākea is this concept of po, this concept of this place being, it has always been a place of kupuna, of sacredness, and continues today with all the protections that we have. We just talk about it in a different way, that we're protecting this place with a monument or World Heritage and things like that. But it was always some place that was revered in kind of this aina kupuna, yeah? And you know, I guess like looking back, the first time I went to Nihoa, I was with the Fish and Wildlife Service with Sheldon Plentovich and her crew that studied the Nihoa millerbird and the Nihoa finch, and it was just a real privilege to get to join with those guys because they know a lot about the island itself. They've been there many times before. And they spent countless hours with these birds and with the island itself, and so they have this real deep relationship with it. But for me, what I try to bring to that group, and I'm not a researcher, I'm not a bird researcher, and I'm not like a plant guy. But what I had tried to bring to them was to just share a little bit more. Along the protocol side of having this, taking the time to do protocol before we go to this place. And it's something that, while sailing with Hokulea and Hikeanalia, it's something that we hold just as important as doing safety, as doing all of our logistics. And doing those things just allows you to just take that second to think about the things that are gonna happen, and to remember all the kupuna that have sailed, that have gone to those places, and all the stories that have gone there, and it just, and for them to be able to, you know, to be open-minded about it, was really special, and for us to be there, and learning simple oli to kind of incorporate into our trips was something that was really awesome, and the crew ended up being really good working together, and all these things kind of fell into place after that. Another trip, I guess, was sailing up on Hikeanalia, and on Hikeanalia, we also took a group from the Nature Conservancy to do some nearshore marine surveys over there, and even that too is a different aspect. To be able to go on a va'a and then to be doing marine surveys in this place of Nihoa was something that was also very important. And for our work within the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, it's not easy to get there, and it's not the resources and the time that it takes to get there is not something that everybody can do. And so the more trips that we can do collaboratively to learn about not only the heiau and the cultural resources on the islands, but also to learn about the birds and the plants and the marine life over there. I think it adds so much more to learn about these islands in that way. And yeah, I think we just, if we continue to do that, we'll learn much more about this place than we do now.
Mahalo, Brad. So those memories and experiences that Brad just shared, for William, Athlene, and Kekuewa, the others in the audience, those who aren't with us, that was the vision, I think, that you folks had in those early years of integrating, for lack of better words right now, conventional research, traditional practices and knowledges together. It's something that feels right to do, but you know there were challenges along the way to get there. A big part of the management structure that we know today has involved community input, and The Reserve Advisory Council still exists and is up and running as an advisory body to NOAA. But I wanted to ask William to kind of share a little bit as an early member of the Cultural Working Group, who is another formal advisory body to management for Papahānaumokuākea. Those early years of the Cultural Working Group, being involved in the management plan, having this opportunity to advise the federal agencies, the state agencies, what a great opportunity, but how was it in those early years of the Cultural Working Group?
It was rough, bro. It was plenty disagreement, plenty need for additional knowledge. But before I continue with this, there's one sort of story I got to tell you about Uncle Buzzy, which kind of really solidifies why this whole effort was needed, and why this whole effort continues to need protection. So, the Western Pacific Fisheries Management Council was managing the lobster fishery in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, and the catch rates were going down, and this was the spiny lobster fishery, and it absolutely drove Uncle Buzzy crazy how the lobster fishery was being managed. And so, if you can imagine, fisheries managed at that time was catch per unit effort, right? So, if you take the number of traps, the number of hours, the number of trips, and you figure out, well, how many average lobsters get caught per unit of effort. And so the lobster fishery was mainly spiny lobsters at the time. And when the catch per unit effort started going down, the fisheries managers at the time and the fishermen at the time switched to catching slipper lobsters, okay? But they never separated them out. So you have catch rates appearing to be stable, but really not being stable because the spinies are going down. You're just replacing them with a new unfished stock, the slipper lobsters, and then that starts declining. And from a traditional and customary practice, when you take too much, you stop taking. And that's also what drove Uncle Buzzy crazy, that this type of fishery management was enabled to continue and enabled to go down this crazier and crazier track. So when catch per unit effort started going down again, because now you had harvested the majority of the slipper lobsters, there was discussion, and I cannot believe the science that was presented at the time, that it was okay to go and harvest undersized and female lobsters with eggs, right? This now started driving a lot of Hawaiians crazy, because this was insane. This was insanity happening, and the federal government was allowing it to happen. They were in charge. They were in charge of the fisheries up there, and they justified it by saying, "Well, we're going to pick up these lobsters anyway, and if we throw them over the side, the ulu are going to eat them." Of course, if you're throwing them back in the same place that you're discarding the bait, and you draw the ulua to the boat, of course they're going to eat them, right? But there are other management things you could do, like keep them in a bucket of water and go to another side and put them back on the bottom. Eventually, things like that were proposed, but not before the lobster fishery crashed. And so just to give you, this was the environment, sort of the political management environment that was occurring at the time, which really drove Kupuna to come forward and say, wait, stop, time out. We can't keep going like this. And so the idea of, and Uncle Buzzy observed his own, I catch the school of Moy and then I'll come back, right? So he was amazing in that he could see the impact that he was having, and then not only could he see, he could stop, and then he could take that extra step of, well, how do we restore it? And we restore it by leaving it alone for now, okay? And so that was really I had to go back, bring you guys back so that you would understand the pain and suffering that some people felt, which drove them to this management regime that we have now, and to put it in the current context, to continue to defend it, because you have somebody asking to allow industrial commercial fishing back into the area after we just expanded it and got more protection. So that's it. At the time, the cultural working group was a bunch of young folks. Not all of us had experienced the place, and it's hard to talk about a place without experiencing it. But we did the best we could. There were some folks on it that could. So we were, going back to the lobster, what would our kupuna have done, right? That was a lot of the discussion. What would our kupuna have done to offset the overfishing that was occurring, the mismanagement that was occurring? And how would we apply sort of Hawaiian values, Hawaiian concepts of reciprocation? Earlier, I heard someone talk about reciprocation. Well, that's a big part of it, right? Not only do you take, but you give. If you don't have to take, you don't take. It's the relationship between people and a place that is not separated. In the main Hawaiian Islands, we tend to separate ourselves from places. I'm glad to see that in this convention that there is a huge role of getting place-based management in place, right? Connecting back to a place, connecting back to the stories, connecting back to kuleana, standing up and going and picking up the rubbish, or going and telling somebody you shouldn't be doing that, educating our children so that they understand not to do that. Papahānaumokuākea is just the same thing, it's just it's a little farther away and a little bit more challenging, but I will tell you that it is a place that has extra mana. It is definitely a place that has a different feel to it. It has, it's a place where there's more connectivity, there's more connection going on. And I think part of it is because there's less diversions like we have here in the main Hawaiian Islands. It's a place where a bird will try to land on your head, right? Nowhere in the main Hawaiian Islands would a bird try to do that. It's a place where an ulua swims up to you and basically tells you, who the hell said you can swim in my ocean? They say it with their eyes. I don't know if they have telepathic abilities, right? But you know what they're thinking, right? It's a place where even the smallest fish is not afraid, yeah? Because, but it's also a fragile place, right? So if you're a baby opihi that's being spawned out there, you have these tiny little specks of islands that you got to be lucky enough to land on in order to survive, right? Not like the island of Maui or the big island where you got a couple days in the water to swim around and you got a bigger target to land and survive, yeah? So it's fragile in that respect. And then it's a place where having spent the night on Mokumanamana sleeping in the bomb crater, right? So the islands were bombed at one time by the military for practice. Sleeping in that bomb crater, you can still feel the kaumaha, the sorrow that the Aina still has for that experience. And that's what drives, I think, all of us and should drive everybody, not only to protect that place, but to understand what NOAA once said. If we cannot protect up there, how do we expect to protect down here, right? And many of us, having returned, go look around in our own places and go, wait, we got a lot of work to do here too, yeah? So it's not the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, it's the Hawaiian Islands, yeah? We're the southwestern ones too, but it's all one island chain. And we all have to work very, very hard in our own places, as being discussed in this conference today. Of how do we make it better? How do we heal it? How do we leave it better for our kids? And so I can tell you that the original cultural working group was kind of like the being in a closet and kind of feeling your way around, because there was a lot of knowledge that had yet to be found, discovered, deciphered, translated. But at the same time, the people in the cultural working group innately understood that there was this connection. innately understood that there was this kuleana, and then stuck it out. Stuck it out. Plenty disagreements, plenty need for communication. Papahānaumokuākea, the name took probably 5-6 months before it was decided that that was going to be the name. Very Hawaiian, yeah? You gotta discuss, you gotta debate. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just along with that discussion and debate comes this understanding that we have to arrive at a decision. Yeah? So eventually, Papahānaumokuākea was chosen as the name, and it is the most appropriate name. And if you're ever on a boat, you see the island rising out of the ocean and the connection of Wakea and Papahānaumoku, Papa Honua. And that, that after that, all of that discussion, and plenty discussion at all levels, kupuna level, makua level, younger than makua level, the Hawaiian Working Group came up with a recommendation, and that's how it should be done. That's how it was done, and even to today, I'm sure there's lots of discussion, and I tell you what, there will be lots of discussion, because one of the things that's coming forward that in the next step is going to be a push to, I want to say this carefully, a push to justify harvesting resources in Papahānaumokuākea to bring back to the main Hawaiian Islands as sort of a way to barter or pay for the trip up there. And that discussion and that debate is going to be very hard and very difficult one to get through. But I'm sure that with the cultural foundation that is in place, the right decision will be made.
Mahalo, William. So before we go too much further with the panel, I know our original plan for audience participation encountered some technical difficulties, but we are still going to try and save some time towards the end of our panel today for audience Q&A. So I encourage you folks out there to think of a question you want to ask our panel to make management of the place better and prepare the next generation of managers to take over. Oh, maybe we do have our meeting sift. We'll figure that out. But Kekuewa, what I left out in the introductions is that you're actually the current chair of the Native Hawaiian Cultural Working Group for Papahānaumokuākea. And that group has always been involved in management, but was really thrust out there recently with the proposed expansion, the need to kind of justify the ocean as not being a cultural void, as being a significant place. Williams touched on the naming of the area. Can you just share a little bit about the value of having that regular cultural review, cultural input, not only into Papahānaumokuākea, but it's actually become regular now. Well, in the earlier years, it was kind of groundbreaking. We see it in all of the panel discussions, all of the sessions here at the conference. It's still very important in the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. The cultural working groups at the lead of that. Can you just share a little bit about the value of having that entity and that input?
I guess like in the Hawaiian worldview, there's this connection, between people and place. And so, when we talk about management, there's a philosophy that the people of a place has legitimacy to speak for the resources of a place. Yeah, that's pretty commonly known now. I think when I joined the cultural working group, that was one of the challenges right away, was realizing that who is the community of this place if like the prevailing narrative is that everybody died off and nobody goes to this place anymore. And so over time, being involved in the cultural working group in the early years when William was the leader and Halealoha was the leader, I think it made us realize that we needed to sort of expand a little bit. So I think there was a real concerted effort to try to identify everybody that had a connection to this place, either historically through their families or has gone up there in recent times, and try to build a community around that. So the cultural working group expanded over the years, and I think an unintended consequence was that it ended up having a lot of, I would say, heavy hitters in the culture working group. You know, kupuna, aunties and uncles that had mana, had a lot to say, basically. And so they you know, our culture working group is full of people. Maybe about, I'll say the list is at least like 50 people or more from all the islands. You know, representation from all the islands, and we give advice. It's an advisory body, yeah. So we give advice to the Monument Management Board on pretty much everything. You know, any kind of cultural issues, any kind of you know, permits. We review permits that go up there. We help to name new species that are found, you know, in the area, so that they have Hawaiian names. So the cultural working group is sort of integrated into sort of the framework and the culture of the monument, I would say, and it's been amazing to actually sort of see how the management agencies have responded to the cultural working group. They've been really open in allowing us to have some element of say and power, actually, which is unusual, right, in Hawaii, where oftentimes Hawaiians don't get a say and don't have any power, right? And so in terms of the expansion, I think we're really vocal. For me, it was just, again, you know, like following in the footsteps of people like William, where, you know, you have these incredible leaders and realizing like it's our watch now, yeah, the younger guys, and like now it's like, are we going to drop the ball on our watch, or are we going to keep pushing this to the next level, right? And so the expansion thing was kind of that was in my mind. I was thinking like, oh, we can't drop the ball, right? It's like all these people before us that pretty much hit every other benchmark that was needed. We're not going to be the guys that failed at the very end, right? And so there was that element of pressure, I feel, from the previous generations, but definitely, you know, we were mobilized and we were definitely involved. I mean, I got to give also credit to Sheila and the Expand Papahānaumokuākea movement. I mean, it was greater than the cultural working group, right? We were just, you know, players in a team of players, really, that came together. And I think that's another one of the elements of the story that needs to be sort of told, is that there's sort of this alliance that has occurred between conservation and environmental people, communities, with that of the Native Hawaiian community. And when we work together, we can achieve big things in Hawaii. But when we don't work together, that's when things start to fall apart. So that's one of the major lessons, I would say, of Papahānaumokuākea. I really think that this is one of the most major conservation achievements, not just in Hawaii, but like the world, right? When you think about the scale, the size, the magnitude, and then also what it means for Hawaii, for us to have like 2/3 of our archipelago effectively protected, like in our generation. That's a huge achievement for us, you know, collectively as a community of Native Hawaiian practitioners and environmentalists. So just happy to be a part of it with the cultural working group and provide any kind of small leadership that I can, you know, with the group.
Thanks, Kekuewa. Athlene, from the agency perspective now, you know, the community recognized the opportunity that existed to provide meaningful input into management. Having worked with DLNR in those early years and now with NOAA, can you share a little bit from an agency perspective the opportunities, the challenges with having that regular input from the community on management? There was a time when it was, again, groundbreaking, when agencies were still trying to figure out what to do with it. But now, again, we see it all around this conference. It's become the norm. So.
Well, if you look back at the timeline, one of the, there are 2 or 3 key things that were part of that initial process that really were part of that groundbreaking dialogue. One of them was when the DLNR created the Northwestern Hawaiian Island Marine Refuge and started to issue permits for activities in state waters all throughout the monument, which was before there was the permitting process that there is in place now. And that was part of the dialogue of the development of the cultural working group, because we actually pulled together many of the leaders at that point in time in the Native Hawaiian community and said, how do you become a part of this lens? Because from the very beginning, we wanted this to be something where if we the agencies didn't want to be the ones who are saying, okay, this is an appropriate cultural practice, or this is not an appropriate cultural practice. In order for us to be able to, pass the straight face test, we had to have that input in order to be able to say, it isn't, it is, it isn't, or, but we're not going to be the experts. We're not going to be the ones who can say that. And so right from the beginning, DLNR decided that in order for us to issue these permits, because of what the criteria were for the permits, that we were going to ask that question, and that we were going to create this structure to have that input from the Native Hawaiian community and the biological community, so that everything we did had that lens of both biological and cultural importance to it. And so, DLNR started that with that permitting process, and then it rolled into the larger monument permitting process just a year later, when the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands became the Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument. And so, from an agency perspective, I think that there was a pridefulness and a recognition that this was an opportunity to do things differently. And that here was a place where, because of what it represented and who was all a part of the voices, starting from when Uncle Buzzy them started their conversations, and then across the state with all of the meetings and conversations with all the communities, that here was a place where we could do it differently, and where we could engage really clearly with a different kind of dialogue and a very different way of looking at the management structure. And, as William said, it was tough. It was really tough, because everybody's feeling their way. It's like, you want our input, but wait, how do we do that? And, how do we trust you that you're going to listen to us? And one of the very first challenging requests that came before the land board was a cultural application that there was not agreement between the groups on, and the entire dialogue at that meeting was in Hawaiian, respectfully in Hawaiian, but it was also a first, where first time ever that there was all dialogue, all in Hawaiian, and the land board sitting there going, not quite sure what to do about this. And so, there are so many firsts as a part of this. And when, it was the governor of the state of Hawaii at that time, Linda Lingle, who was the one who wanted to initiate the World Heritage process, and asked us to get involved in that. And I think if we had known at that point what we were taking on, we would have thought twice about it, because at that point in time, there had not been a U.S. World Heritage nomination for over 15 years. There had never been a U.S. World Heritage nomination that looked at both the biological resources and also the cultural resources. And the criteria and the bar that you have to pass for that isn't just this or this, it's both. So it's twice as hard, instead of being easy this way and hard that way, because you actually have to pass the criteria across the board. And in that process, in engaging with the communities, and particularly Office of Hawaiian Affairs, in writing that document and gathering the information, because Kekuewa was just finished with some of his PhD research at that point, and we were starting to learn a lot of that, and pulling all that together, because each one is like writing a dissertation. We compiled this stack of knowledge that was absolutely impressive. The amount of boxes we had to, remember this, Keola? The amount of boxes we had to mail off as part of this was also important. And we still are the only mixed site in the United States, because it's not an easy bar. And so so just over time, it's been and continues to be, I think, a learning endeavor for all of us. It's a component of how we strive to continue that dialogue. And I would say that the agencies have embraced how to continue to make that dialogue work, and that, at least from our agency's perspective, there's a huge pridefulness in knowing that what we represent is unique across not just Hawaii, but globally. There's no place else that I know of where there is an agreement for co-management that represents two federal agencies, a state agency, and the indigenous agency that represents the indigenous voice, like there is for Papahānaumokuākea globally. And so, you know, to be a part of that is profound.
Mahalo, Athlene. So Brad, you shared a little bit about actual experiences in the place. And I know one thing that you're involved with when you're not trying to think about how to leave me behind and get back on the sea is the permitting process for Papahānaumokuākea, which, you know, it's heavy. But we have 4 committed partners who are open and go into that. Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA, DLNR, and OHA, all working together. You guys meet regularly on all the permit applications coming in. As we're wrapping it up on the panel, can you just share a little bit about the value of having all those interests and disciplines represented kind of at that nuts and bolts level of management?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, even when I'm gone too, I think about permits. I actually dream about them at night. Super fun. But as a manager, there are various different perspectives that go into the permitting process for us, and for all of the applications to go into Papahānaumokuākea, I think all the different perspectives really adds to having complete projects, having projects that are really where the researchers really thought out a lot of these different scenarios that could happen during a trip. And as far as the culture working group goes, like how Kekuewa was explaining, like it's awesome to have them involved in the permitting process, because it's you can really rely on them to have a different perspective that a lot of the researchers would actually have, and it works really well to kind of get them to think about different aspects of going over there, and you know, even with Fish and Wildlife being there, and NOAA Fisheries and the National Marine Sanctuaries, I think everybody really adds to that perspective. And for all the trips going there, these perspectives really, I guess, create a full project, I think, and we're getting better at it over time, and the more that the culture working group can be involved in our management, the more that community members can be involved in the culture working group, and it really works well for us to have that perspectives at a very high level of management for Papahānaumokuākea.
Mahalo, Brad. So as we're wrapping up, Kalani, is the meeting safe? Is that a thumbs down? Okay, thumbs down.
Oh, great.
So we do have a couple minutes left for our panel discussion, and I did want to use this time, if there's any questions from the audience, we can take a couple for the panel. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask out there? If you raise your hand, we can get you a mic. Okay, we got one right there.
I spelled it out.
Okay, go for it.
Thank you so much, Battle. Just shooting out a question for your opinion. Would you say is your feeling in terms of being concerned for the new administration's possible effects of reducing the monument side? And is that something that you think about? Is it something that sounds like the community and the people were considered when this was all being planned? So that's what their defense is as to why it should be returned back to the state. Just wanted to hear what you were on that.
Well, you know, your statement about the amount of community consideration that went into the decision to expand the monument was very clear. I mean, there were multiple meetings held in Hawaii. There were discussions that occurred throughout the state. So, for the Trump administration to sort of roll back protections in Papahānaumokuākea right now would would likely be a political decision and not based on any of the science or any of the public input or the consultation with indigenous people, because all of that was taken care of in the process leading up to the expansion. It's fortunate that we have, I think, strong legal folks that are building their case should there be a rollback, and there certainly will be legal action that will be taken.
Yeah, so I think we're only going to have time to take that one question, so kalamai for that one. As we're wrapping up, we have a couple minutes left. We're going to have a short video clip for you folks to check out. Again, on behalf of the panel, all of the managing agencies, we'd like to mahalo the Hawaiʻi Conservation Alliance and all those involved in putting the conference together. Excellent job. Thank you to all of you for attending the panel today. You made it just as valuable as the panelists that we're honored to have speaking with us today. And we're going to have a short video clip. I want to turn the mic over to Uncle Saul Koho'ohalahala to share a little background on the clip. And then we're going to go into that, and that's going to conclude our panel for today.
Thank you, mahalo. I thought it would be appropriate, since this panel is up here, to just give you a little vignette of the future of Papahānaumokuākea. So if you would allow us in 3 minutes of your time, it's part of a vision, and our hope is that you will all participate in this effort to keep the expansion of Papahānaumokuākea, and keep in mind that it is really for the future and the children's ability to have a place like this to keep as part of our heritage for Hawaii. So with that, thank you for allowing us this. Yeah, mahalo.
Papahānaumokuākea is a really special place. It is home to a healthy ocean that no longer exists in other parts of the world. It has deep sea coral reefs, sharks and fish that have never seen people, species that are found nowhere else but here, and so many birds. They're everywhere. For Hawaiians, we believe that we came from this place. Our chants tell us stories of our creation, and it is because of our connection to Papahānaumokuākea that thousands of people in Hawaii and around the world have worked to protect Papahānaumokuākea for generations. We didn't want to see our ocean impacted from things like overfishing or even deep sea mining. But now, those protections might go away. Our Papahānaumokuākea is under threat. We can't let that happen. We need to protect Papahānaumokuākea because Papahānaumokuākea is our family. Please, join us in protecting our ocean.
Sorry, I know I said I'm signing off, but I'm back. We have another opportunity for you guys, for those of you who were interested in that video and some of the things going on. There is an opportunity to share your ike and mana'o on the ongoing effort. I wanted to ask, is it Sheila? Do you have the information that people can go to if they want to learn more and make a decision on their involvement?
Aloha. Where all the exhibitors are, in front of the concession stand, we have a booth, and it's relating to Trump's 2 executive orders to review the protections of Papahānaumokuākea. So we're in the public comment period for the 2nd review, and that review is to determine whether we should allow mineral exploitation, things like deep sea mining in our monument. We don't think we should. So please make your voice heard. You can go to our booth, you can sign a petition, you can write some comments and submit it, and it's actually due next week. So we're collecting all of them and we're going to submit it to the administration. Thank you.
So that concludes our panel. Thank you for attending. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and mahalo for all the work you folks do. Aloha.